Hey everyone, my name is Jessie and welcome back to my channel. Today we are talking about my recent reads reviews. So I have 3 books to review for you all. The first being Night Circus, The Light Between Oceans, and the last being The Bands of Mourning and just the whole Mistborn Trilogy 2. So if you want to skip to one of those reviews, I will leave timestamps in the description below. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe. I release new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. The first book I want to discuss is The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. So I went into this book knowing absolutely nothing about it. I figured there would be a circus, and I figured it would be at night. And that's all I knew. Circus follows these 2 magicians who are bred for this competition their whole lives. And this competition takes place at this circus, and it's kind of their battleground, if you will. So they are competing magicians trying to outshine each other with these extravagant displays and tents and attractions at this circus. I was really pleasantly surprised with how magical this book was. I wasn't expecting it to be so magical. I thought there would be it would be more of a contemporary drama and not quite so fantasy. But it's very much a fantasy book, and it's told in multiple perspectives. So I'll say what I really loved about this book was the setting, the magic system, the circus itself, and how it's described, and how Erin Morgenstern's writing really sucks you into this world, and you can feel what the characters are feeling. You can smell the circus, you can touch it. It's the way it's described is so excellently done and so detailed. That was absolutely what stood out to me in this book. It's very much driven by its setting and its magic. What I will say I didn't like as much was how confused I was at the beginning. So right away we're thrown into these characters' lives without really knowing who these characters are, what's going on, and I feel like this story revolves around this competition between magicians, and yet the competition is never really explained. So it was very hard for me to connect and feel the stakes of this competition when I didn't really know what this competition was for, why, how, why Marco and Celia, these 2 characters, why were they chosen? Like, so from the very beginning, it's kind of just you're thrown into Celia and Marco's lives, and a couple of other characters as well are in the mix, some of which I didn't know that were totally necessary perspectives to follow, and you're immediately just kind of along for the ride without really knowing what the ride is. So, and maybe my mind always kind of wanders at the beginning of every new read unless it's very, very engaging right away and I connect right away. So if everything for me is told, especially in fantasy stories, if everything is reliant on you capturing everything from the first couple chapters to understand the entire rest of the story, that for me is definitely a downside to a book, because sometimes in those first couple chapters or in that first part of your story, I'm not totally engaged yet because I don't know these characters, I don't know this world. So I think that's why for me this was a 4 out of 5 stars. Again, the writing was so strong and so descriptive, and it truly is magical. I think anyone can appreciate what Erin Morgenstern created in this world and with this circus, and how you just wanted to be a part of it. But just the way it was told and like the point the reader is dropped in without any sort of clear explanation of stakes or like why we should care about this competition, that for me detracted from the story, and I just couldn't get engaged as much as I wanted to. The next book that I recently finished was The Light Between Oceans by M.L. Stedman. This follows a husband and wife who live at a lighthouse. The husband is the lighthouse keeper and falls in love with this woman who wants to come away with him and live at this lighthouse with him. So it's essentially following this young couple and kind of their lives, and they're trying to have children. And the wife is unable to get pregnant, has multiple miscarriages, and just as she's mourning the loss of her third unborn child, a boat with a dead man and a crying baby washes up on shore. And she believes this is a gift from God and takes this baby in as her own, only to realize that there may be someone else out there looking for this baby. It really examines a story about justice when there really isn't a good answer, and there's no right and wrong, and it's very complex, it's very sad. So once again, didn't know anything about this going into it. I'd heard great things. I knew it had gotten adapted into a movie. I was very excited, and I loved M.L. Stedman's writing. It's writing that I personally connect with more so than the more flowery writing like that's in the Night Circus. I don't want to give away any spoilers, but it is a hard read. Like, this is not a book that I picked up and was like excited and happy to read. It was one I was like, oh, let's see what happens next. Like, there's just this feeling and building of dread the whole book, and it's that you watch those movies where you know that something bad is coming, and you're just dreading that moment that it happens, and it's horrible. Everyone's seen movies like that. This book, that's the whole book. It's just dread that's building and building, and then stuff happens, and it's like, oh, it's as bad as I thought it was gonna be. So it's not like a fun, light read by any means. This is a hard one, and it was very depressing and sad. The characters are so flawed, and it was really hard to root for even the characters that you think you should be rooting for. Like, there was no right answer. And so I think that this book is a really, really good read for those of you that like complex family drama contemporary reads. I do like those, so I personally did enjoy this. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. But it's tough, and you'll find that even though the characters are well written, you're not really in love with any of them. Like, it's really hard to love any of them because they're so flawed, but I think that's what makes it so brilliant, because no one's perfect. It's real life. This is real life. So I appreciated how flawed these characters were and how vulnerable they were this whole story. So if you're looking for something that's complex, that makes you think, that will stick with you, Light Between Oceans is a great one. If you're looking for something light and fluffy to bring to the beach, probably not this book. The last book I'm going to talk about that I just finished tonight is The Bands of Mourning by Brandon Sanderson. So this is the third book in the second Mistborn trilogy. This particular trilogy takes place, I believe it's like 400 years, 300 years after the events of the first Mistborn trilogy. And this is in a world that still recognizes the original trilogy, and makes a lot of references to them, but is much more developed than the Mistborn world that we followed in the first trilogy. So it's much more of a Western feel in terms of setting and atmosphere than the original trilogy. I personally rated every one of the Mistborn second trilogy books 3 stars. I thought this was a good series. It didn't blow me away like the first trilogy did, and I think that if I had read this series closer to finishing Hero of Ages, I would have appreciated it more, because I was on such a book hangover after finishing Hero of Ages. That was such an awesome, epic conclusion to that first trilogy that I was missing that world. And so if you have just finished Hero of Ages and you are like, I miss Mistborn, then I highly recommend picking up the second series right away, because it actually does have a lot of its religions based on the events and the characters that were in the first trilogy, which was so cool. That is such a cool idea and so unique and so brilliant of Brandon Sanderson to do something that has never been done before, where we have a whole trilogy dedicated to this one time in a fantasy world, and then you have a second trilogy dedicated to a totally different time that takes place way after the first trilogy, but still in the same world. So we actually did get cameos from some of our favorite characters from the first trilogy, which was so cool, and those were my favorite parts of these books. The rest of it was, in my opinion, even though it was very much action-packed and plot-driven, it just didn't, it didn't grab me like the first trilogy, and I can't pinpoint why. And I think it was the setting. I just wasn't as connected to the idea of the whole Western setting. I very much love those traditional fantasy worlds where, you know, we're in that medieval kind of time. So I just didn't connect with that setting much. I did enjoy some of the characters a lot though, so I do want to give a big shout out to Wayne in these books. Wayne was such a high point. Some of that banter between Wax and Wayne it was gold. And then I absolutely love Steris. She's probably my favorite female character that Sanderson has created besides Vin. So I loved Steris. She was my favorite part for sure of the third book, The Bands of Mourning. I know there's going to be one more book. I didn't know that when I was reading this book, so I was like, how is he gonna wrap all of this up in these last like 20 pages? And then I read that there's a 4th book in this series, so I had always thought it was a trilogy. It's a series, you guys. The 4th book's coming out, I think, next year, pretty soon. So definitely worth a read if you love the world of Mistborn, you love the magic system. We're back with all of our metal mines, our hemorrhagy, our allomancers, which I just love all of that, and the hard magic system that Sanderson created. It's so fascinating. So definitely worth a read if you really enjoyed Mistborn, and if you weren't a huge fan of Mistborn, or you just have read it so long ago and you're like you've forgotten a lot of it, maybe don't read this series yet. It may not be your favorite, because I personally prefer the first trilogy over this one. So those are my thoughts. And that's all I've got for you. Those were the 3 most recent reads I had that I wanted to discuss a little more in depth. Have you read any of these books? What did you think? Leave your comments down below. Make sure to like this video and subscribe, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!